Hello everybody, I'm at the Garden Club of St. Pete and we are doing an appraisal fair today. It is so fun to see what people bring. Last year somebody bought some really unusual Hall China salesman samples and we saw some other things that were one of a kind. So let's see what they have this year. The ladies and gentlemen of the Garden Club are assembling for our appraisal fair today. I am a local area, well, I say local, I actually travel across the country all year long back and forth, but Florida is my winter home, and I am here in the St. Pete area, and I conduct estate sales, and I do appraisals. I sell at a couple of antique stores here in town, Vintage Modern St. Pete and Andrea and Friends, and I do shows in Mount Dora and West Palm Beach, and so what I'm going to try to tell you based on that knowledge and what information I have is a little bit about your piece, where it came from, why people collect these things, and I'll try to give you a sense of what I think the retail value in our area is currently, or if I think it would sell better somewhere else. We'll talk about that and where that would go. And a few of you had some specific questions about items, like how to clean a piece of glass, or are these particular block prints more popular or less now? So we'll talk about those things as we go along too. Tell me a little about how you got this.
My husband and I bought a house to remodel, and the people had moved out and left everything, all kinds of trash. And this was thrown in the garage with another little piece. And I thought, well, that's cute. It looks to me like the full-size ones they put knitting in.
Very good. Well, you are absolutely correct. It is like the full-size ones you put knitting in. This is what they refer to as a Martha Washington cabinet, when it's this particular sort of squarish with the canted corners that are cut off at angles like you see. And they always have generally drawers in the middle for your sewing implements. And then these little cases here would hold knitting needles and tall items that you needed for sewing and knitting and that sort of stuff. This one is child size, and it's made out of plywood. It was made by hand, and somebody managed to get some legs and put this together. And I would say that this was done based on the green and ivory colors. These were very popular colors in the late 20s through the late 30s. So I think it's a really great thing, and to find it for free in a house, it's like getting a little discount, isn't it? These are popular right now. They're selling, the adult size ones are selling for more than they have in a long time. They're usually going for around 100 to 135. I would say this one isn't going to be a whole lot less than that because it's child size, because it's painted rather than regular brown wood. That makes it a little cuter too. So I think somewhere in the $100 to $125 range would be a retail price on this now, which is not bad for having gotten it for free.
Would you clean it up?
You could clean it up, but I would be really gentle with it. I would say the legs are pretty dirty. I would use, maybe warm soap and water on a cotton cloth, dab it rather than scrubbing it, and just go over it sort of with gentle strokes and see how much will come off. But a lot of people who like these sort of things, they like them a little bit beaten now. They like them to show their age and that they were used. So I wouldn't repaint it or go to any, I wouldn't go to try to make it perfect and new again. Particularly because it's primitive. Notice the colors are similar to the piece of furniture we just saw, and that's not surprising because this originally came out in the 1930s also. And this is McCoy Pottery. It has a very nice signature that says McCoy on the bottom. You may or may not be able to see it out there, but it's rather large. Most of their pieces are signed. This great pattern, this color combination they called rustic. And like you were saying, do I clean up the piece of furniture? Well, not too much, because rustic is what people are looking for. When they did this, it's got brown, it's got green. They're not trying to make it specific and really detailed painted. They want it to look a little bit home crafted. They want it to look primitive. That was McCoy's market. And they understood their customer. And so they made this piece for about 30 or 40 years. In this color combination from the 30s, a retail price would probably be somewhere in the $30 range. They said they were about $60 a year ago, and that is correct because Fenton is really coming up, and it's very interesting to me to hear it. You got it out in the country in a little Amish store in Ohio. They don't have cars, and they don't usually have easy access to town. You will find little like variety stores out in the middle of nowhere in Amish country that are open for them to be able to trade in goods. And they'll generally just have sort of what a dollar store would have, but once in a while you'll find a bunch of interesting stuff. And these are really good. My guess is the reason you only paid $2 for this, which is an incredible deal. When Fenton went out of business in the early 2000s, I'll bet this ended up being liquidated, ending up in some sort of a jobber's thing. It got passed on. The Amish store bought it in a box of stuff and they put it out for $2 because they got it cheap. And you got a great deal. It is the, it's cased, it's pink over milk glass, so it has sort of a rosaline effect. It's a late piece of Fenton. It does have the Fenton F in the collar here, and it is a room diffuser. So you put your oils in, and then it diffuses it through this piece on the top here. So this wasn't something Fenton made for very long at all. There is a Fenton logo on the bottom with a 0 in it, which means this was done during the early 2000s, which is their last decade. And yes, you're right. I think about $65 is the correct price on this. So you got yourself a great deal. When were you touring in England? You said at least 20 years. And I think that makes sense because we see pieces like this from about 30 to 40 years ago is typically when we see these done. They made them a little later in England. This is a plaque, and it's to look like an old English building. This one says the Tea Shop, and it's signed by the person who did the decorating, Hazel Royston, if I'm reading that right. And it is indeed Hazel Ceramics. So this is a small factory in England, and they were inspired to do these because there was a larger company called Ivorex in England that did these, and they did theirs in sort of a chalkware that tended to chip very easily. So this person, I think, saw the opportunity to do something that was hand painted and a higher fired ceramic so that it will hold up better. And so that's where we come up with these. I think it's a very cute piece. I do see interest in these sorts of things again because this style is 40 years past, and so that means now we're starting to see a new generation who grew up with such things and remembers them. Do you remember what you gave for it back then?
Very much, but I never did.
It wouldn't have been a lot, and it was a souvenir piece. I would say probably $20 to $25 would be a current store price on that. This one's a particularly good one right now, and the reason for that is it's green depression glass. And what that means to younger people is it's uranium glass. That's what they call it. And the reason they call it that is because to get this yellow-green color, they had to put a little bit of uranium salt or uranium oxide into the batch of glass to get this happy yellow-green. It's inert when it's done in glass. There's not enough of uranium in here to be of any sort of an issue to anybody using the piece, but that's how it got the color. And because of that, it glows under a black light. Well, it wasn't until the 70s when we started seeing a lot of people getting excited about things that glow under a black light, and then the glass collectors went around and started catching on to all the glass that glows under a black light. Yellow-green Vaseline from the Victorian era, this shade of green from the Depression era, and now, unlike most Depression glass, which is still very slow in the market, the green is very popular, and particularly pieces like this. It's on the large size. We don't see vases with handles very often because this is Depression era and it cost extra money to put the handles on. You only did that if you were really trying to make your piece look showy. The etch on here is a floral etch. This was probably done by a local jeweler. It is not a pattern in a line. Right now, because they're popular again, I would think $40 to $50 would be a store price on this. I hear all the time usually from antique dealers who specialize in some particular thing that they're having trouble finding, how you just can't find anything anymore. Well, you just told me somebody paid $25 for this. So I beg to differ. You can find things, especially in St. Pete. It's a great antiquing destination. Now, someone asked me a very specific question about this piece. Well, your information here, and it looks like you paid $1. I see a tag here, so you did well there. And the information on it, which it is signed on the bottom, we can confirm, says it's a Webb Corbett vase from England, and it's 6 inches with the cut crystal, flared and footed with the drapery. This probably was done sometime around the late 20s. It definitely has wear on it, so you can tell it's old. Now, your question on this wasn't just the value, which is probably in the $45 to $50 range currently. They should sell for more, but crystal is a little slow right now. But your question on this was, you notice it has a film, and what do you do about that? Film on glass happens when you leave water in it for a long period of time, probably, again, because it has a lot of wear. This was someone's favorite base to put their flowers in, and so they just kept changing it, and they didn't change the water, or they just took the flowers out and put new flowers in. And eventually you get, especially in Florida with all the phosphorus in the water, you start to get this sort of lime scale on it. The first thing to try is effordent, believe it or not. You put a tab of effordent in there, let it bubble up. Sometimes that's enough. With a scrubber sponge, you can just wipe that out. If it's been in there a little bit longer, it happens with decanters. And I've heard people say if you had a decanter that they left vodka in for years, put more vodka in it, sometimes that will actually take the chemical out. Since that's a lot of vodka, my advice instead would be to get a product called CLR. You've tried a bunch of different things. You didn't use muriatic acid yet. At that point, muriatic acid may be the only solution. You have to be careful with it. If you read the instructions, you can do it yourself. There are some people who do glass repair who you can send this to. I don't know whether this piece is valuable enough to do that with. So at this point, I think either live with it or carefully reading the instructions, using heavy gloves, outside in a ventilated place, use muriatic acid and try to do it that way. Barkeeper's Friend sometimes will take that out as well. If you haven't tried that, I would try that first. That's a very good suggestion. These appear to be vegetable nut ivory, which is good because that means they're not elephant ivory, and that means there's not a problem on selling them. Even the one that looks like an elephant appears not to be elephant ivory. And that's a good thing because in a lot of states now, you're not allowed to sell elephant ivory, even if you inherited it, even if you have always owned it, even if you know it's old. The rules around selling elephant ivory pieces have really become restrictive in this country. And you had a question?
You just did something with that with your cheek.
Ah, yes. Good observation. I put it to my cheek, and I should explain why I did that. The reason I'm doing that is because your hands get calloused and you can't feel temperature variations. If you put it to your cheek, you'll feel right away if it's colder than the room temperature. If it's room temperature, it tells me it's plastic. If it's colder than room temperature, I know it's a natural material. So this is definitely a natural material because it feels colder than the room. So that's the reason I did that. Netski are very collectible, and people are actually wanting these that are made out of non-ivory now because they can trade in them. I would think your values are probably in the $40 to $60 each range on the Netski. You told me you thought that this might be something to do with cigarettes. And you are absolutely right. She thought it might be a match holder, and I actually think it's the cigarette holder because back in the 1920s and 30s when this little piece of depression glass was made, they would have had unfiltered cigarettes that were short, and this would be about the size, and you'd have them nicely lined up in there for your guests to take one and have a smoke while they were at your house. Things are so different now. Back then it was expected that you would provide cigarettes and ashtrays and things to people, and of course now you can hardly smoke in anybody's house, even your own. We have a nice floral etching, and all of a sudden there's this band that's just sort of like drapery with lines in it. Well, what would that be for? That is the rough spot to take the match and flick it across and light your match. So that is the match striker, and that was something that you pointed out to me when you brought it up here. And so it's a neat little piece. How did you get this?
2 weeks ago at a garage sale. I think it was $5.
$5 at a garage sale 2 weeks ago. Well, that's very good. This should sell typically $20 to $25, sometimes a little more on these cigarette holders. Tell me a little about this sweet little bust. Oh, you found another at a garage sale later? Oh, that's neat. Well, the one that you have that's signed and numbered, this one has a number on it, but the signature is very blurry and you can't really read it. But what it says in that gold, because the signature just got applied very thickly, that actually says Cordey, C-O-R-D-E-Y. Cordey busts were very popular in the 1930s and 40s. They have this pastel look. They would use actual lace to do these, so a lot of times they're broken around the edges. This one is actually in very good shape. They tended to do a lot of hair curls and a lot of design. They're always this very, very nice sort of glossy, very pure porcelain. The people who did Cordey came over from Europe. They fled Europe and they set up shop in New Jersey, and they were very, very popular and successful for about 20 or 25 years making these pieces. They were very popular to collect about 30 years ago. People are not picking them up like they used to, but I feel like we're starting to turn a corner here. For the last 10 or 15 years, I would say all of the interest has been mid-century modern, and if it's not that, we don't care. And if it's traditional, well, we don't care. Younger people are starting to want traditional again, partly because they've grown up around nothing but IKEA. They are used to everything being streamlined and very modern and very sparse, and they are wanting something fancier. So I think we're going to see interest in things like this again. Also, a lot of 30-year-olds, their grandmothers collected this 20 or 30 years ago, so they grew up around it and they recognize it too. So because of that, I would say that the busts probably worth about $35 each currently. There was a time they would have sold for about $50 to $65 each, and I think we may see that come about again. It is in Capo De Monte style, but it is not actually Italian. If you look at the bottom, it has a nice mark that says this is ELPA and that it is made in Portugal. We really see a lot of Portuguese ceramics coming into the market around the 1980s in particular, and I do believe that's when this is from. So it's not wildly old. Because the scene is specifically the Last Supper, there are people who collect Last Supper scenes exclusively. And they would want it on a vase, they'd want it on a print, they'd want it in various other forms. So I think there is a collector market for these. Do you mind me asking what you paid at the thrift store? Do you remember? About $10. Well, I think you got a really good deal. I would expect this to sell for $35 to $40 right now. On the bottom, it tells us it's James Kent, Old Foley, Staffordshire, and this is 18th century chintz is the pattern. Chintz is anytime, and you'll like this being garden, folks, anytime you see an all-over floral pattern, that is considered chintz. Very popular in England, also made in Japan. The reason that you wanted me to look at it is because it has a little slip in that says $79 eBay. Well, what does this tell us? Does this tell us something we really need to know, or does this tell us we need to do more research? What's your guess? More research. Very good. You all are paying attention. This is great. The problem with, and I see it as a garage sale, people love to take printouts of things they see on eBay and put them under a piece at their garage sale and then say, well, I'm asking $10 less than what they want on eBay. Well, is that $79 an actual completed sale for this piece, or is it the most expensive thing that we saw somebody asking and hoping they could get? And I have to say, for this piece, as cute as it is, $79, if I was a dealer, I would be thrilled to get $79 for this because it's about a $35 piece. So don't believe what you read. Always do your extra research. And if you want to do that research, a good thing to do is click the box that says completed sales before you go into your search. And that way you know you're seeing what things actually sold for and not what people just hope they will sell for. This little piece has a surprise in it, and I would have, I guess, found it on my own, but the person who brought it actually showed me.
That was in my mother's sewing box.
It was in her sewing box. Pennsylvania or Maryland, it definitely has that look of having been hand painted. It's got the sort of toll wear on the back. But here is the surprise. Off comes its lid, and inside it is to hold a thimble. And there is our thimble. Now, you said this had been in your family. Now, the one thing, it's a nice little presentation case, and the case itself has value, but the thimble, I think, is rather special, and I haven't looked at it yet, so I'm going to now. I don't see a mark in it. My guess, honestly, is that somebody had the thimble, wanted to present it, and went out and bought this, because this piece looks like it's probably from about the 1920s or 30s. The thimble looks like it's from about 1890 or 1900. Before 1915, in this country particularly, not all gold was marked gold. I would have this tested. I have a pretty strong suspicion that this is 14 karat gold. And if that's the case, the little case is worth $20 or $30 to a sewing collector, and the thimble is worth about $150. So together you're probably looking at $150 to $185 for that little set. Tell me how this came to you. I know you said it was a family piece. It makes sense it would have been from your great-grandmother. And it makes sense that it would be late Victorian. It is black in the correct way because Queen Victoria was in mourning for many, many years, and she wore black and women wore black, and it was what you did up until about the time she died. And then everybody started wearing white. So this should predate that. I would say you're right, probably 1890 or so. This was a nice fancy one with a feather or two. It's velvet. Early millinery stuff is popular. People, this is old enough, people probably wouldn't wear it. Some people buy the old ones to wear, but this one would probably just be for display at this point. It's in wonderful shape, and we'll put it on for you. It is really a sweet piece. It's in great shape. That really matters. There's a few little holes in the drawstring, but that's normal because it's hard to store things without them getting a little bit of critter bites over this many years. I think your value on this is probably $65 to $85 currently. And then you got these, and I was so glad that you were here to tell us a little about them because they have a great little box, but they also have a little information in here. And so let's read what this says. It says these were given to Anna Willoughby, mother of various people, so great-great-great-grandmother, and it says, cherish these and keep them to give to your daughter at the time of her bridal showers, as they were one of the gifts given to your mother at one of hers. I was debating between what they are or collar stays, because they are these little leather wrap pieces and they have a wire in them and they're very flexible. And the reason for that is it turns out these are old style hair curlers. And that's what you would have done with them. And that's why she said it was very important to have them for your daughter at her wedding, because of course your daughter is going to want to be put in curls, just like I was done at the time. They're very sweet. I'd say they date to probably around 1910. Does that sound about right? Maybe a little earlier. Yeah, they could be 1880s, 90s. They didn't really change very much. We really don't see these much. We see lots of 1950s curler sets, and I have to be honest with you, they almost all end up in the trash at the end of estate sales. But we don't see this era much at all. And for this era, I would think that just as a novelty, probably $20 for the collection of them would be a store price. This little piece here is really sweet, this little doll. It has the real hair and it is sewn tightly to the head, which is nice, actually. Somebody, this was handmade. Most people did make dolls for their children. They didn't go out and buy them unless they were very, very wealthy or lived in the city. Where was your family from?
Upstate New York.
Upstate New York. Okay, very good. Well, I would say this was done here in the United States and probably 1870s approximately. A lot of folk dolls like this. There are people who really love folk dolls and they will pay for these. This one is in good shape. It's got its little nightshirt. The story is great. The biggest value is going to be to you and your family because it came through the family, and sentimental value is real even if it doesn't have a dollar attachment. If you were to sell it, you know where it came from. You can tell its entire story of where it came from. The fact that it was made for you said your grandfather. Yeah, the fact that it was made for a boy rather than a girl makes it a little bit more special. I could see this in the right hands with the story and somebody loving it, maybe going for $100 to $125.
My grandfather moved from upstate New York in 1950. Genesee beer was not sold down here at the time.
That's right.
So he started with Genesee and then also did Schaefer.
Wow, so he brought Schaefer and Genesee to Florida. And that was a pretty big deal. It's also the reason we don't see a lot of these beer trays anymore. That was the beginning of first the expansion and then the contraction of the brewing industry in America. Until Prohibition, there were lots of little breweries. Every little town had a brewery and maybe multiple ones. And most of the beer was sold regionally. All of a sudden we have the interstate highways. Transportation is cheaper, it's easier, and suddenly, oh, we can send your favorite beer from New York down to Florida where all the New Yorkers are moving. Let's do that. And all of a sudden we get these beer brands that become bigger and bigger and start taking the little ones out with them. So these beer trays are 1950s and 60s. You see a Canco mark on the back of this one for Schaefer. This one's a little heavier, slightly older, probably this one's 60s, this one's 50s. They get lighter and lighter. By the 70s, they turned plastic, and by the 70s, most of these regional brands are gone. So this is what people are looking for. They prefer this era to this era. They prefer pre-prohibition to post-prohibition. Conditions a little worn on these. If they were in great shape, I'd say 25 on the Schaefer and probably 40 to 50 on the Genesee. On the back, somebody wrote Amita Sterling $10 on it, and then someone else wrote $8 on the front. So we're having a little bit of disagreement about what the value is here. This is from Thailand. It is sterling. Around 1949, when Anna and the King of Siam came out with Yul Brynner, there started to be all sorts of interest in design and culture of that area. Folks in Asia were pretty smart, and they figured out, oh, Americans like this, let's start exporting it to the United States. So we have this big influx of what we call Siamese jewelry around 1950. It's typically sterling with a design in the middle. But what's unusual about this one is this design is a Bell Huey helicopter. So this was done for someone in the military to bring back with them. Usually you see a Balinese dancer or something that's more to their culture. So this is a little unusual, and because of that, and because there are collectors for this kind of jewelry, retail on this is probably $20, $25. I'll show the mark to all of you folks. They are signed. They're all hand-painted. They should date from about the 1950s, I would say. They would have been making things like this before the war, but this signature and this base with this sort of reddish tan clay and the way they're signed. Italian ceramics were very popular in the United States, and glass, after the Second World War for a couple of reasons. First of all, we had a lot of people there in the occupation. Then people started traveling there. The Italian economy got worse and worse and worse after the Second World War, and by the early 70s, they devalued the lira so much that their goods, which were very nicely made, were really inexpensive for us. And so a lot of Italian things came over to this country in this period. These are all hand-painted. You can tell on the neck. So there's some realism, but they're also exotic birds, so they've got this great color. It's a very Florida thing. This would be the place I would think they would sell for the most. And there is a lot of interest in Italian design. And while this company with the long name I can't pronounce is not specifically collected for that company, it's really about the design and the decorative value. I would think that these would sell somewhere in the 135 to 150 range would be the top end. And how did you get this?
I found it in a thrift store in Jackson, Tennessee.
Oh, that's great. And how much was it?
I think I paid $1 a piece.
Oh, that's great. Are they all the same? Well, originally there would have been a picture with this painting on it to match. These are little beverage tumblers. These are Victorian era. The prices on these have gotten so inexpensive that we are finding them in thrift stores. I paid $1.99 for the last one I found. I sold it for $15 2 days later at the antique show in Mount Dora. And I think that 15 or so is an approximate price on these Victorian glass tumblers now. Some people are not recognizing them, and they're donating them to thrifts. And that was a great buy. Anybody know what these are? They look like game boards or cribbage boards. You've got the right idea. But this one will be a little more, okay, actually, I'll show you this one because it's unusual. And you probably won't get it from this one with the tambour top that opens up. But this one might be a little more familiar. This one's probably late Victorian, early 1900s. These are pencil boxes. And so you'd have your pencil and your pen and your little quills in here. And this would have been something that you would have taken to school with you, or maybe left on a desk so you had easy access. But it was so that your writing equipment would be portable. It's not like now where you have a big disposable and you click the button and it doesn't write on you and the ink doesn't pour out. Back then, you had to have all of this stuff, and it had to be in a case because you could slop a lot of stuff around and create a lot of mayhem around your paperwork or spill ink or any other sorts of things. So Pencils and pens that had been used had to be kept in boxes so they wouldn't get the ink on other stuff until it dried. It's a neat collection. You've got various eras here. This one is from about 1900. These with the slide top, and they do look like cribbage boards. These were probably made in Czechoslovakia or Eastern Europe. But then you open it up and there's your slots for all of your pens or pencils. It's a really neat collection. Did you get these at different times?
The reason I have them is my sister is an artist and she started collecting pencil boxes.
Oh, neat.
Whenever I see a pencil box that I can afford, I buy it for her, put it up for Christmas or birthday. So these are the ones she hasn't gotten yet.
Oh, that's great.
Interesting ones.
That's cool. And this one is a little later. It's got cars on it that look like they date to about 1930. This one's interesting because the top slides and then you turn it sideways and you have vendor storage as well. So there's lots of different mechanisms, and that's why your sister and a lot of other people really enjoy collecting pencil boxes. It is a specific collector interest of its own. Do you mind me asking what you gave? $30 at the most, somewhere in there. Well, you did well because, you know, this one's really cute. If it was in better shape, it'd probably be the most valuable because of the scene with the children, but it's a little worn. I would say your values are anywhere from about $30 to $60 each on them. I wanted to show this next because somebody brought it up and they said, oh, you know what this is? It's a really neat piece. And I said, yes, I do. And yes. Tell me how you got it.
And in the estate sale in New York State, I already have McCoy, California, and Hull, but I didn't have an example of Francona. So I saw that and I liked the bird and I said, oh, I could buy it. I don't think I paid more than $8 or $9 for it, but I know they make a lot of those.
Well, they did make a lot of this piece because it was really popular. This is called a pillow vase because of the shape. This is Francoma pottery. There's some things about Francoma. This one has the typewriter mark on the bottom. And so it says Francoma, and that stands for John Frank of Oklahoma. He taught at the University of Oklahoma. He taught ceramics. And in 1933, when the Depression was at its worst, he left that job and started his own company. And he started it in a town called Ada, Oklahoma. Ada had tan clay deposits, and they also had lots of natural gas, which you need to fire the furnaces. So it was a great place to set up. Well, about 20 years later, in 1955, he moved to Sapulpa. And Sapulpa's clay was brick red, so you don't see the tan anymore. So we know this piece dates before 1955. Now, Francoma is best known for some tan glazes and a greenish to brown glaze, desert gold, and there's the prairie green, which is the famous one. These colors that are also variegated but are different colors like blues were mostly in the line for very short periods of time. These glazes, other than the browns and the greens and the ones you usually see, are pretty hard to find. And so this is a little better than a typical version of this vase. I would say the value on it now, you said you paid $8 or $9. The value on this now is probably in the $35 to $50 range because of the unusual color.
Dad called me Anna Banana.
Anna Banana, yes.
So I could have gotten it from a family member.
This is a very nice little piece, actually. It is Bakelite. I'm certain that it's Bakelite because I've seen this piece and seen it be tested before. We see clusters of cherries a lot more than we see bananas, but your name wasn't Cherry, it was Anna, so bananas. It's going to date to about 1940. During the Second World War, we couldn't get rhinestones from Austria anymore, and a lot of our rhinestone jewelry was made with Swarovski crystals, and the Swarovskis in particular were big supporters of the Nazis, so we didn't want to buy anything from them. And so we started making jewelry out of other things, including Bakelite and Catalin, which is the formulation with the colors. And it became very popular. You could carve it, you could make it into fun things. This would have probably been something sold at the 5 and dime back in about 1940. It is worth somewhere in the $135 to $150 range now because the clusters of fruit tend to sell a lot higher, and bananas are not something you see very often. These are Gregorian Chants. They were all hand-drawn. They did a lot of these, and it became very popular about the time that your husband got this. How long ago would that have been? 30 or 40 years? In the 80s, yeah. In the 70s and 80s, these started to come out of the woodwork, and people were selling them and framing them, and they were very popular for a period of time. At that time, they were selling for around $100 a piece. And I think now the price is maybe a little south of that, but they're still very collectible, and they really are old. They frame them with glass on both sides and hang them as a room divider so you can see it for both ways in a conservatory. Yeah, that's really neat. And when they're framed like that, I usually see them priced around $150. You're correct, it is vellum. That's very sweet. How did you get this?
At an auction.
It's very nice. And of course, you saw the mark on the bottom, I'm sure. And it is marked Lalique, France. It's also got a paper label that says Made in France, which is a little bit different. We don't usually see that label on it. You got it for $50. Well, I think that's still a wonderful price. You know, it's funny. Sometimes we get in this mentality of everything has to be a garage sale price to be a deal. $50 for this piece of Lalique is that's a great deal. I'd pay $50 for this all day long. I believe that the value, it's nice because it's an animal. Turtles are specifically interesting to people who don't even collect Lalique. It's also got that great quality. It's got all the texturing on it. The detail is really good. You know, I think you could see 150 to 200 depending on the dealer selling this piece pretty easily. Oh, it's glass. And I know it doesn't look it from there. At first, I actually thought it was resin when I looked down on it. And then I thought, no, I think that's a piece of Lalique because I saw the neck sticking out. But it is glass. They primarily did satin glass. They didn't do a ton of stuff in color. So this is actually a little unusual for them. If you enjoyed this video, check out this one. Also, click thumbs up to like this video and check the description for information about our Patreon, our memberships. We've got a lot of different levels with different perks and bonus videos and early content. Also, please do check out our website, theantiquenomad.com, for appraisal help. And we'll see you again for more adventures in the antique and vintage community soon. Bye for now.